touch soon with the recording. Now I would like to invite our student panelists, if you'd like to turn on your camera. So yeah, this panel is student organizing and activism. And just for those who might not know, my name is Michael Chachura. I'm one of the co-EICs of the Rutgers Race and the Law Review. I'm a 3L, and I'm joined today with.
Hi, my name is Monica Krup. I'm co-editor-in-chief of the Race and Law Review, also a 3L at Rutgers Law in Newark. And today we have fabulous panelists joining us here today from both Newark and Camden's campus. One of our panelists is Madeline Gayle. She is editor-in-chief of the Rutgers Newark Law Review. She's a clinical law student for the Criminal Youth and Justice Clinic. She's an evening class representative for the Student Bar Association and a Lawyers for Justice volunteer. And her note, "Till death do us part, extricating the use of confidential marital communications in extradition hearings," is to be published in the 2021 Symposium issue for Law Review. So thank you, Madeline, for joining us here today.
We're also joined by Nina Rodriguez, who is the EIC of the Law Review in Camden. She is a diversity, inclusion, and belonging working group member. She is the VP of Alianza, which is Camden's Latin American Students Association. She's the secretary of the Women's Law Caucus. She is a treasurer of the Immigration Law Society, and she will be clerking in the Superior Court in Mercer County post-grad. Thank you for being here, Nina.
We also have Tway, who is a 2L at Rutgers Law in Camden. He is VP of APALSA, the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association. He's a Camden Justice Scholar with interest in civil rights and public interest law. And he has a master's in education. So previous to law school, he worked as a special ed teacher for grades 6 through 12.
And we're also and we're also joined by Jalen Porter, who's a 2L at Rutgers Newark. He went to the Arizona State University with a double major in political science and justice studies. He's also the vice president of the Black Law Students Association for the 2020-2021 year. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to all our guests for joining us.
So we are going to try to be cognizant of time, and there is a lot to cover. So I think first we're going to talk about community organizing and activism within the law school. This year has been challenging for many different groups of students. So
first up, Tway. This past Tuesday, APALSA hosted an event examining and dismantling AAPI, Asian American and Pacific Islander discrimination. Can you tell us about your event and community organizing in the Zoom School of Law era?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's a big question, right? We tried tackling it on Tuesday and we found out we ran out of time. And there was just so many things that we, as the organizers from both APALSA and Newark, first off, it was a great event in that it was the first time Newark and Camden APALSA got together. And it's kind of crappy that we had to take Atlanta and 2020's like general terribleness to get us together. But we're glad it happened. And with that was the realities of like, organizing what kind of event. Student organizing can look like a lot of things. It could look like organizing a panel like this for student voice. It could look like organizing a panel of practicing lawyers to talk about what they're doing. And it could look like organizing workshops that students are leading themselves and teaching others, because we're realizing from our education that we're not getting what we need to be successful in a myriad of ways, particular to racial tension and racial stamina, racial literacy, right? And we can wait for them to the administration to make CRT and racial literacy mandatory. Not holding my breath, but what Penn Law was doing was pretty cool. Or we can take a book out of like the 1960s and how the students at Berkeley demanded and like led their own education until the administration catches on. And that's what kind of we were talking about. And to get there, there's so much we have to go through. We have to, so I mean, I don't want, there's so many tangents here, but I want to focus on a couple of things. Student organizing at Rutgers requires real, genuine relationship building and consistency, right? Where this isn't like, surface level networking that you get someone's number, you go to an event, we're talking about genuine relationships. And it has to be through collaborative liberation. It has to be all about intersectionality and solidarity. You can't just go to APALSA events and think you're going to like create some sort of student momentum that's going to be everlasting if you're not also going to the Women's Law Caucus events, if you're not going to Immigration Law Society, if you're not going to the Bell APALSA. you have to like actually be intentional with creating like cross demographic collaboration. And that only then will you get like real student organizing. I'm sure there's more that we can get to later, but I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, Tway. Yeah, and just thinking about the solidarity and Berkeley is similar to the Newark Rebellion. And with that, we want to turn to Jalen. So as VP of ABLS, can you tell us what organizing looks like in the pandemic and in the midst of continued violence against Black bodies?
Yes, thank you for that question. So during the pandemic, and especially during this online environment, organizing can be very tough. It seems like you don't have as much balance as you usually would, especially given everything that's going on now, where as you're trying to process one event, another event happens, then another event happens, and another event happens. And so we're just caught in this endless cycle of violence. And so it's trying to manage a balance of taking care of yourself while also providing support. And something that we've been trying to do with ABLS, just keep a constant stream of communication of saying, our doors is always open. You can always come talk to us, tell us about anything that's going on. And because ultimately to advance our goals, we have to be healthy. We have to be in a mindset where we can advocate for ourselves. And so yeah, we're mainly just focusing on improving our mental health, improving our relationships with each other, and making sure that we have community to mobilize.
Thank you for that answer. That actually touches on something that Dean Mutcherson talked about on Monday's panel with deans from various law schools across the country. But she kind of asked them, what do you tell students who have to balance the emotional toll of activism and how hard it can be to be a student when all you really want to be doing is creating change, but we have the responsibility of law school at the exact same time. So I remember one of the panelists answered, like, we have to finish law school if we really want to make change. So how can community organization, like how can you feel supported both within your organizations and within the student body and administration during these difficult times? And that's up for any of our panelists, sorry.
If I may, one of the things that I know that Nina and I strive for in the law review is to keep the lines of communications open. We actually, the last write-on was actually done under intense conditions. Not only did we have a pandemic, but then we also had, the national tragedies with Black and brown men getting killed. It seemed almost at every turn. And, one of the things that, Nina and I talked about is like, what is it that we were going to do? We had a write-on competition where students were actively participating, and we needed to make sure that, it was a twofold thing. We needed to make sure that we graded those things and make sure that we, that we gave them an answer as to whether they're on a journal or not on a journal, so that then they can go on and prepare themselves for OCI. So all these things happening one after another was intense. And the one thing that we did was, together with our faculty advisors, is give people the option of basically, opting to go into the fall one instead of doing the summer write-on competition. And I think that alleviated some of the stress that people felt, but I often wonder if it was enough. And I'll let Nina jump into this because we were having conversations almost daily about this. And the people who were in charge of, making sure that we gave people an answer, were stressed because we were always questioning ourselves. Is this the right thing to do at the right time? Should we continue? Should we stop? Should we? And it's, I think one of the things that that Nina and I just kind of like decided was like, okay, we're just going to try to do the best way that we can and continue keeping the lines of communication open with other students.
Yeah, and if I might just, hop right off of Maddie's point, the thing is, Maddie and I are the first double Latina editors-in-chief of the law review on both campuses. And so we decided before any of this happened that diversity and pushing that was going to be a major goal for us. So we see this happening. We see these national, tragedies, unrest, all of this stuff happening. And we realized we had to do something because, we're both two Latina Brown editors-in-chief. These events are disproportionately affecting Brown people. That's also going to disproportionately affect journal membership. And so like Maddie said, this is the first time you're navigating something like this. You may wonder, is that enough? Was that the right choice? But you have to at least do something. And it allowed students to kind of focus their academics as well, because journal membership is important, but it also kind of just gave weight to what was actually happening and letting students take that time, letting students take that, emotional moment that maybe they need for themselves to heal while still going and trying to push forward to finishing law school and finishing all that stuff.
Could I jump in about the emotional toll question too?
Please.
Because that is so real, right? The emotional toll that students, I loved how the last session talked about paying students to be like diversity ambassadors or whatever. Because I think Nina and I have been on all of them this year for Camden. Anywho, emotional toll is real. And what I mean about that is like, it's so easy to dismiss this emotional toll that we talk about as like in your head, imposter syndrome, that like any kind of outside factor. And it needs to be normalized that this emotional toll is real and is the responsibility of the school and our peers to address it. And that support can look in many ways. Administratively, just class-wise, there's got to be like group agreements and like norms and how we discuss, race-related topics, which by the way, the law is all about race-related topics, right? The law is basically a codification of how to oppress people based on color, just saying. If we're not addressing that, we're not living that in our curriculum, then there's no way emotional toll for us student activists won't still be there, right? It always feels like we're talking when we speak up that there's going to be like a sledgehammer coming back at us in one way, shape, or form based on our peers' silence or administrative silence afterwards. And so normalizing, also thanking your peers when they speak up goes a long way, or just like saying I heard you or something. Oftentimes, my white peers in one L class in person, when these topics come up, it would just be silence and there's no engagement. And that's type of violence in and of itself, right? Not engaging. So yeah, I'm gonna drop that there and we'll walk away.
I think that's a good transition to our next topic, where we want to talk about student support and administrative support, particularly in the classroom, and how Rutgers can make the classroom a safer place for students that are doing the invisible labor. Thank you for bringing that back. Dean Freeman mentioned that, and I thought that was an excellent capsule.
Right, and speaking of support and just the exhaustion that we felt, looking back into Right On and looking into the present, recently the school community was made aware of an incident when a racial slur was used in a professor's office hours. The incident was reported to the administration. The administration failed to respond. Black 1L students organized, including a petition, and the administration has responded and promised change.
So we're gonna initially direct this question to Jalen and just ask, what processes would you like to see the administration put into place to address this incident, and how can we do better as a school?
Okay, yeah. So first, I want to focus on allyship and what that really means. And so when you're offering yourself as an ally, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position to advance the interests of that marginalized or oppressed group. So you're providing emotional assistance, you're providing assistance to help them with their material needs. And so allyship requires more than just, putting Black Lives Matter in a statement or in a social media profile. It requires more than checking your mental diversity box when you try to figure out how many friends of color you have. It's a principled position. And that means it's a process, a long process of learning and unlearning. And so when I think about what transpired these past few days, these past few weeks in regard to the situation with the 1L, I found myself disappointed, honestly. I feel like at a school like Rutgers, where there's a reputation for being more progressive, there's a reputation for being the people's electric law school, that oftentimes people who consider themselves to be allies or liberal or progressive, they find themselves being defensive to call outs. So whenever the oppressed group is asking for accountability, the person who think that they are an ally, they get defensive and they say, well, what do you mean? I have supported you for so long. So what do you mean that I'm doing this now? And that response is completely inappropriate, because as an ally, you should say, if I harmed you, how did I harm you? And leave it there. And then you go home and you do the work to figure out how can you not continue that harm. And so when the 1Ls issued their statement, and after I spoke to them many times, what they described to me is their peers, their classmates, even in faculty and professors and administration, just gaslighting them. Just simply put, gaslighting them. It's the classic tale of white victimization. When a white person causes harm, they're brought to the table to be held accountable. And when they start speaking, all of a sudden, they become the victims. And then it's the people who are calling out the harms, who are, as I've heard this language being used, they become the attackers, the people who are attacking them. And that is not allyship. That is not addressing the needs of Black students here. And that is something that the administration, students, and faculty need to work on, simply put.
Thank you. And speaking of how students can work with administration to make some changes in the future, one thing that's been brought up is whether or not students think that administration should have a policy against using racial slurs or having them appear in our case books. And so, Jalen, I'd love to hear what you think, and I want to open the floor after to the rest of the panelists as well, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I didn't think that topic would be so controversial. Throughout my experience here, I've had professors who flat out said at the beginning of the class that we may go over material that uses these words and we're not going to say it in this classroom. And I feel like that should be the standard across the board. And I know that some people touch upon aspects of academic freedom and, oh, this is the real world, but that really just leads into the point of how the academy has played a large role in continuing racial oppression, or how this quote unquote the real world sentiment has continued racial oppression. We live in the real world. We know that when we step outside our door, we might hear a racial slur, but that doesn't mean that that has to be our learning experience. That doesn't mean that we have to hear that when we're trying to go to law school and get an education. And so I think that moving forward, there should definitely be a policy saying that these words will not be used in our classroom, and establishing an accountability process for whenever they are used in the classroom.
Thank you. I'd like to open it to any of our other panelists.
If I may, I mean, I think that's a perfect way of dealing with it, quite frankly. The one thing that I don't want to happen is not have access to the raw material. Because I think we need to be aware of how language was used. But I like Jalen's proposition of like, you know what, we're not going to use these terms in these class because that's appropriate. That's the way that it should be. That we recognize that this language was used in case decisions, in our case books, and know about it, because we can't forget about it. We should not forget about it. But at the same time, the type of language should not be used by anyone. That, for me personally, that goes not just for our white counterparts, but quite frankly, also our Black counterparts. I'm older than the rest of the panels, but they might have children who are practically the same age as Nina. And I remember the time where my son came and started using the N-word. And I sat with him and I said, you know, I don't know what's going on with your friends and I'm not sure what's happening, but in this house, we do not use that word. And, you know, he tried to argue that, oh, well, we're just appropriating the word. And to me, it was just such a violent word that I just cannot accept it. And again, it's, you know, we came to a consensus like, you know what, when mom doesn't hear, you know, in the house is fine, but in this house, we do not use that word. I don't care if you're using it maliciously or whether you're using it because you're trying to appropriate, but I think that these words are hurtful. They are violent. And while on the one hand, we should know about them and know how they were used in the past, I quite frankly don't think they should be used in the classroom.
Tway or Nina, if you have any thoughts on this.
I mean, to be honest, at this point, there is no reason why a faculty member would not adopt a policy by having a discussion with the class in the beginning of the year or whenever. There is no room for that. And if a faculty member has a problem with, you know, perhaps establishing that ground, they need to reevaluate something major for themselves. I mean, it's a lot about the culture as well. Law school is an institution that was not built for people of color. So the culture already is oppressive. The culture already is alienating. And we do not need other things like Jalen was mentioning when we're trying to further our education. We're trying to do so in a manner where we can best excel ourselves without having to take on additional emotional labor because people don't want to sit down and set ground rules for people. So if they're not going to be doing that, they need to reevaluate, and they also need to just think about how that affects students of color when they're trying to learn in a learning environment, because the culture itself is toxic anyway, and this is just one step in a better direction.
Yeah, I echo everything everyone said, but Jalen mentioned something earlier about that defensiveness, right? Which we've all seen it turn into gaslighting. We've all seen it, but now the white student becomes now we become the transgressor for holding them accountable. And this feeling, this racial stress that white people and others who violate or make infractions, whatnot. This is a pedagogy. You can study this. There's data to highlight the points of where someone is when receiving this kind of feedback, and you can coach. Like when I was a teacher, I was also a coach for new teachers. And oftentimes the new teachers that we taught, we had to teach them about socialized whiteness and this defensiveness that comes with it, right? But the point is, like other grad programs in the humanities have already touched upon this kind of learning for their students, and we in the law school have not. We haven't even. Now it's because we embed this kind of arguments in the law in and of itself. Right, so it's like almost antithetical to like the practice of law, and that's not okay, right? Exactly what Jane said. It's not acceptable. Like you have to understand that you can't shift the school's energy to holding the feelings of white people when the harm is being done and repeat that harm. There's so much more I want to say. I'm just losing it all the top of my head. Check it out. It's a real pedagogy. You can study this, John.
So I think that takes us to our conversation of what classroom culture and allyship in the classroom. And Tway, you talked about this before, like even thanking your students for speaking and just feeling supported. What can students do in the classroom to help one another?
Can I jump first for this one? Because we talked about this when I was teaching too. When I was a classroom teacher, grades 6 through 12, and it's really hard to be a bad kid, right? And the language that kids say, it's socialized from somewhere. And so it's hard to, really like lay the hammer on them and like redirecting them. You want to educate them. And I'm realizing that 23-year-olds are kind of the same way, right? You want to re-educate. It's hard not to be angry because of the long traumatic effects of being a 31-year-old person of color. But basically, there are ways to, from the teacher side and from the other period side, to hold account, to like support students in the moment, right? And I forget the really cool acronym, but it's like, first you want to stop the language that's being used. And you want to ask questions about where it comes from. Then you want to provide the actual like reframed education. And then you want to echo. This is the most important part, the echo, right? Where other students echo the redirection. and when the professor echoes the redirection, because then the person who's violating, who said the transgression, now they're like, oh, I'm actually, there's a whole school of thought out there that I might be wrong. That's what gets the gears changing. From the teacher side, I think you have to practice facilitation techniques that notice when a student is perpetuating harm on another based on race, gender, and whatever. Right, so you gotta name it. Like professor could be like, I've just noticed that 3 white men talked over a person of color, and just leave it out there. And the students will then grapple it themselves and be like, oh, we should redirect ourselves. I just noticed that only women have talked so far in this, talk about this case about sexual assault. Let's open it. There are facilitation techniques that equalizes and then also like holds like community and like make it a brave / safe space so that we don't, students of color and others don't feel the strain and stress. Sorry, talking a lot, no step back. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of our other panelists want to comment on that? No. Jalen.
Yeah, I think that was a great point. Especially like I feel like we need to focus on how our students respond to being called out. Because I know he made the comment of the professor just saying that and letting the students sit with it. And I think it's that additional training or additional learning of how to sit with it, of how to take a step back and go through your thought process, like, okay, what I said was wrong, why was it wrong? So I think that definitely needs to be in place too, maybe something in orientation or maybe something else, but it needs to be said, because accountability is a two-way street. You can only hold someone accountable if they want to be held accountable. And so it requires someone to be open with understanding that you're going to cause harm eventually. The world is not evil and good. It's not black and white. People cause harm on a daily basis, and the harm doesn't define you. It's how you address that and how you work to not committing that same harm. And so I think definitely we should have professors speak up. Students should sit with their comments that they made and move forward with that.
So we have a question from the Q&A, which is a great segue into our next topic, which talks about, which was a journal in academia. And one of the questions is, it always feels like RU admin just scoffs and waits out students / years of students who are particularly activists and wait for more docile students / years. How can we keep up our student activism in the face of our short 3 to 4 year tenure, especially considering we're zombies during 1L? And so we want to talk about existing organizations as vehicles for change. And so with that, we want to throw it to Nina and Maddie to start us off to talk about journal. Specifically, sorry, I'm going to throw it to Monica first to ask the first question.
So as the first double Latina EICs, you guys have, you're introducing an MSP factor into your journals, and you're pushing for all journals to adopt the same. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your experience as the first double Latinas EIC and what that has meant?
I can take that first, and Maddie, jump right in. So, I mean, it's been an incredible experience, to say the least, to be able to work with someone like Maddie. That is my absolute sidekick, I tell you. She's got my back constantly, and just having somebody that also understands the importance of diversity in the ways that, it's important to me, has been incredible. In terms of the MSP factor, it is something that has been in existence in Newark for a little bit now. We did not have that in Camden, so that was my first mission, my first job when I became editor-in-chief, to pass it here in Camden. Now, what that does is it allows for more diverse journal membership. It increases the diversity on the journal. We had a little bit of problem with that because there were some people who just didn't have the correct assumption about it. Some people were calling it certain things like quotas or affirmative action, which is just so beyond the point. It's to function to increase diversity, because journals, there's a major problem. I'm not only the first Latina editor-in-chief of Camden's Law Review, I am the only Latina on Law Review in Camden. And that should not be the way that it is. And so the MSP factor functions to increase that, functions to give those students that opportunity, because journal is crucial. Journal is something that is important to have on your resume. So for us, just to be able to broaden the diverse viewpoints and to be able to have more students of color who are writing more notes on law review who are getting their academic scholarship out. That just helps with the mission entirely.
Yeah, I think Nina, said that perfectly, and I really don't have anything to add except, to add my experience. I think for me, having Nina, as the person that we're steering the ship together, has been amazing, and we learn a lot from each other. There are a lot of times where, we just really melded really well together. And the unfortunate part about, our experience together is that we had to do this all virtually. It would have been great for, I think, our membership to watch two women of color basically making decisions, having that connection, just having conversations, so that, because I think part of the issue is that we all seem to kind of gravitate to people that look like us, and meld really well with people that look like us, because we have the same backgrounds, we have the same culture, and it would have been great to be able to expand that, just to have other conversations with people with different cultures and different ideas and different perspectives. So that's the one thing that we missed, in this Zoom environment, unfortunately, and that I wish we would have been able to do, because I think that the takeaway that I want is that, diversity is not about exclusion. It's not about excluding white people. It's about including everyone. And that's the takeaway that I really want people to take away from that. And unfortunately, we are where we are. Hopefully next year will be better, when it comes to basically making sure that, diversity means, that everyone collectively working together towards a common goal. That's really what it is for me. And this experience has been great. I wish we could have done more, quite frankly.
And so, Nina and Maddie, how has being, two Latina EICs during a pandemic, during a time of racial reckoning, how has that shaped your leadership, and how has that changed your view of what journal is or can be as a vehicle of change?
That's tough, but I'll try to do my best to start it off. I think so. One, and I'm sure Maddie can attest to this too. First, it was a little bit of a giant to take on, because you feel like people are watching you, and you feel like they're scrutinizing every move you make just because you're holding such a high position. So that comes with a lot of added pressure and unexpected pressure, especially in the virtual environment. Not to say that a lot of that support, it's not supportive or anything like that. It's just that's the fact of the matter. Something that we did that Maddie and I were both just very, very passionate about was we focused heavily on publishing diverse articles by diverse authors. I'm sure there's great scholarship on, why, I don't know, certain legal doctrines are better over another, but no. So we're publishing articles on police accountability, protection of cultural heritage, things like that, just to increase the diversity of the scholarship, because, those authors have a voice as well. And when that's our mission, that was something that we were able to achieve. So that was a little bit different this year than, perhaps previous years, but something we're equally as proud of.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, part of the issue was that we didn't have a blueprint on, going from in-person to Zoom, and also trying to make sure that the quality of our work remains the same. Because 10 years from now, no one's going to remember, oh yeah, that's when, everything was just going crazy, like the whole world decided to go crazy. No one's going to remember that. What they're going to remember is like, what does this article look like? Does it look like it usually does? So I think we also put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make sure that the quality of our work remained the same, or was even better, because we decided that we wanted to have diverse, articles out there. We wanted to have more women basically lend their voice, to scholarship. We wanted to just make sure that we weren't doing just the same regular thing.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. It's really challenging time to think about, how to do something going forward when this 1 year, your tenure, right? Our tenure has been so, who knows what's going to happen, right? And so David King, who's in my white collar crime class, has asked a great question about whether or not the administration should work to solidify and entrench affinity organizations like APALSA, ABLS, et cetera, ALAS. And so the question is, what could the administration do to help cement vehicles of change or have them continue to flourish? So I'll open up to any of our panelists.
It's interesting. Dave and I talk about this a lot. And so I flip-flop because sometimes I think I don't really want the administration's help besides them attend and give me money to do events, right? Like, I love the mentorship. I love still being an organization. So like, I don't know if there's like charter redoings every couple of years. I'd rather not have that. And then like, so the beautiful thing about teaching is you learn a lot more from your students, and so there's like, as law students, as folks who've come from organizing backgrounds, as folks who come from all these other like areas of academia and like lived experiences, we have already the knowledge we need. And so if like administrators could help, trained administrators could help facilitate pulling that power that we already have and like letting us like empowering us to like put on our own events and put on our own learning and stuff like that. That's the only thing I really want from my administrators. I don't need another panel of alumni telling me what their law firm does for diversity initiatives, although that's for other people. I'm sure there's others. So David, I don't know if that's what you're hoping to hear, but if you want to just, and if administrators can just continue coming to our events, right? Like, not just like, the only time I've seen an administrator come to one of the Impulse event was after Atlanta, which like, again, like that's not real solidarity or support. That's like a reactive response. Where's the proactive support? So I'll stop there.
If I can say just really quickly, I think you just said that really well, better than I could have. But the one thing, when I did the judicial reception, the one, couple of years back, the one thing that always amazed me is that, I think the administration knows a lot more people. They have a larger network than I do. And it would have been great to be able to tap that network, to get more people to sponsor our events so that we're not, trying to raise funds from students who are already, saddled with student debt and trying to stretch every dollar. I remember trying to do kind of like, fundraising events. But it always seemed like I was basically asking money from the students who were going to be, who were supposed to be the recipients of, of what we were trying to do. So I think opening up their networks, opening up their, their networks wallets somehow, I think that would be something that the administration can help with. I do agree that, when you have something that's student run, it should stay student run. It shouldn't be, run by the administration in the background somehow, because that's going to lead to disaster, quite frankly.
Thank you. Next, we want to turn to maybe how we can cement these ideas in the curriculum. So specifically, we want to talk about critical race theory in the curriculum and race-conscious education through clinics.
So on Wednesday's panels, we had professors speak about the different ways that they propose introducing critical race theory into the curriculum, whether it's through a mandatory 1L class or through a capstone class, things like that. So I just want to, this is open to any of our panelists, ask about your experience with race-related courses at Rutgers, how CRT has been introduced to you, and then I also want to ask Jalen and Maddie about their clinic experience and that live lawyer-client relationship that expands outside the classroom.
So I can start, since I took critical race theory last semester, and it was a great experience. It was a small class, unfortunately, but it was a great experience. And I remember our classmates, we felt like the class itself was kind of like a venting session, where it's like, we could talk about things in that class that we could not talk about in our other classes, either because the professor did not mention race, or just simply put, because people were not comfortable engaging the topic as it needed to be. And so I do think that critical race theory should be implemented as a requirement, especially because there's not a single thing in the legal profession that is not touched by race. It's not. There's not a single career field, none of it. It all has some connection to race, has some connection to gender, sex, anything. It's all connected. And so I think that at the end of the day, it's going to help you become a better lawyer. It's going to help you become a better advocate. So I don't really see any downsides to having that race education.
Thank you. And Nina, sorry, Madeline, if you want to talk about your clinic experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll echo what Jalen said, and add to it that, you know, in my opinion, I think CRT should not necessarily be a class by itself, because then that basically lends itself to being something that someone will choose whether they're interested or not. I think that should be part of the curriculum in every single class, no matter what you're discussing, whether you're discussing electronic discovery, Constitution, whatever it is, everything has to have that component, a class dedicated to that. I know that in my experience in clinic, that's when I was exposed to it. First in the theory aspect, you know, the clinic professors did an excellent job of basically presenting the material, and then, you know, basically trying to give us practical guidance on how, when we have clients, how, you know, we're supposed to, you know, how do we deal with certain issues of race? How do we navigate, you know, our clients' dilemmas, in, you know, whether it involved race or not. And sometimes, you know, it wasn't clear, you know, some of our clients, you know, that race played a part, but you can kind of tell that maybe in the background there was some, you know, some type of, that race was related, but you just couldn't, you know, how do you deal with when you can't prove that that's what it is? How do you talk to the client about issues like that? How do you recognize it, and how do you kind of like affirm to the client, like, yes, you're right, you know, let's work this way in order to achieve your goal, and things of that nature. So I think it just should be something that is done in every single class, not just one specific class. At least that's my opinion on that.
I think too, it's extremely important for the students, you know, especially students of color, because when you are able to weave race into these conversations and in these crucial topics, you know, whether they be foundational courses or just other courses as well. Yeah, I mean, you can't escape it. Race is embedded into the law. But when you're a student of color, I think it helps you to feel seen as well, which is just something that's just all too familiar for us. That's just an unfamiliar reality as well. So you feel seen, you feel validated, and you feel like you have a place and a stake in this career field that you're going to enter. You know, you no longer walk into the room and you're just taken aback because you're the only person that looks like yourself. No, we're having this discussion and we're having it with other people that don't look like me, and they're going to learn, and they're going to learn today. And so it's important, it's crucial, but it's more so, you know, it extends from an academic perspective, but also for an emotional element that is important for students of color.
This conversation is giving me so much energy. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I haven't had the pleasure of taking the CRT class offered in Newark yet, there's a similar one offered in Canada. I haven't had the privilege yet. I have taken plenty of racial literacy classes in my other grad school experience, and I would love for those experiences to be mandatory for all of our law students, because we talked about this earlier about understanding racial stress. And this is not a one-off thing that you can like take an hour-long panel discussion and learn about. It's work, right? It takes real reflection, real vulnerability to do that, and it takes a space where you have to have trusting relationships and like a community of care to do so. So we're talking about like multi-sessioned deep dive into our first connotations of race. Right, that's what I'm talking about. And I've offered this before to administrators, and I've pushed back because like, oh, it sounds like mental health Tway, and like we don't want to be open to liability. At the same time, with that mindset, you're thinking, oh, is mental health only done by like top-down, like elitist, like one, like top-down knowledge, or like community is a way to improve mental health. And this is what we're talking about. And these sessions, they'd be so helpful for white folks to see the actual socialization of whiteness. Right, where you're asking to think back about your first racially stressful moment, and then you're like, you can do it in like how we've done it. And I'm going a little into the weeds here, but you play a scene in your head, a memory, exactly how it happened. And then you reflect on where on your body it physiologically appeared, the stress, so you can identify it in the future. And then you play it again with like prepared statements that you wish you had gone better. Now you're developing a toolkit of responses, both for the students of color who have experienced these racially triggered moments, and for white folks who are like, oh, that's what I wish I had said before. Now I have that memory, I can play it again. And you do this over and over again, you model it before. This is the learning that all of us need, but specifically our white folks, right? And it takes repetition, it takes relationships in a good space, and it takes like proper facilitation from the administrators or whoever they bring it in. But we need this, right? And the law field needs this, we're behind.
Yeah, so I want to connect that to questions that are in the Q&A and talk about the way that faculty and administration can support critical race theory discussions. Sometimes faculty might not be aware of how to talk about race. So whether there are specific ways that class dynamic or how the classes are taught can address these student concerns, and just popping in like, what can faculty do to set the proper tone, or even when students experience racialized harm and violence in their classes, what can faculty do to step in and address the problems? Also, I just want to preface, we have about 10 minutes left, so.
Okay, well, one thing I hear a lot is how some faculty members feel uncomfortable talking about race, or saying that they don't have the proper experience or whatever. And I think at that point, it's just an excuse. Our faculty members are highly educated, lifelong students. So I don't understand how it's difficult to start to learn about race, to start to learn how to incorporate it in your class. And I feel like if it's so difficult, it makes me question the scholarship, because it makes me question how you can produce, or how can you produce so much material in the law? How can you teach the law for so long and ignore race, ignore the consequences of these laws and the impact they have on minoritized communities? And so I think that it's unacceptable for professors to continue to say that I don't feel comfortable talking about this, I don't have the experience. It starts with you learning and gaining that experience so you can incorporate it into your curriculum. And for the question of how can faculty, or what is the role of faculty when students experience racialized harm and violence? Well, as a professor, it is your responsibility to create that safe environment. It's your responsibility to have a classroom where students feel like they can express themselves, and they feel like they can interact with their classmates and interact with you. And so if you notice something, say something. It's that simple. If you notice something, say something and try to do something about it.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, Jalen, because I remember in my 1LE year, there was a professor who basically avoided topics of race, avoided topics of sexual assault, avoided any of what he thought were the hot topics. And, I asked him a question. It's like, during one of our office hours, it's like, I noticed that, that certain people feel like they can just say almost anything. And sometimes I feel that, that this could be a really, good learning lesson for varying views. It doesn't have to be necessarily my view. And his response was like, I just feel real feel really uncomfortable to what Jalen said about, having the class devolved and go down a rabbit hole that I cannot take them away from it, because I feel like if someone says something really egregious, that I've lost half of the class and they will not respect, what is being taught here. That having that, what he called the bad taste in your mouth, he was afraid of losing the class to a specific comment, or losing the class to something that he couldn't control. And I think Jalen, you're absolutely right that they probably need to have, just like we have CLE for lawyers, they need to have CLE for professors in learning how to deal with things like this, learning how to get the class back on track, dealing with the situation, and then getting the class back on track. And I think because I think the uncomfortableness that they feel is because they don't want to lose control of the class and lose control of the material that's being taught. And I don't think I don't believe that they're trying to be, they don't want to engage. There's things that they have a fear of losing that control of the classroom, but they need to be taught.
Thank you. So our last question, which really, really hurts because we have so many questions we wanted to ask you. We only have a limited amount of time. And I'm, reminded of the words of, I think, Tway, that we can't just do this in an hour, right? We're not going to solve the problems at Rutgers Law with an hour. And so the question is, looking forward with more time than just an hour to help maybe fix these problems. As you enter the legal field or your 3L year, how do we keep being better students and future lawyers? And so we'd love to hear from everyone. So maybe let's start with Maddie.
Wow, way to put me in the spot. Actually, one of the things that I've actually done, which I think that, there's so many things, but I'll start with one thing that I am implementing. What I've learned through clinic is that it may not be possible for me to do the work that I do in the clinic as a job, quite frankly, because it's not, I need to pay bills. But what I have done is I've started the conversation with the firm that I'm going to and asking about their pro bono and making sure that I'm able to have the opportunity to do pro bono work and present to them the type of work that I would like to do. Whether, it's with, working with juvenile delinquents or, working with, adult prisoners, whatever it is, that the work that I'm passionate about, that I start that conversation. So that's what we can do as future lawyers, is quite frankly, not be afraid to ask, because the answer will always be no unless you do.
Thank you. And Maddie, thank you for that. And then good luck post-grad. I'll turn to Jalen, who will be a 3L this fall.
Yeah, that is a tough question. When you have an answer, let me know. No, so ways I can be a better student going into my 3L year is continuing to be kind to myself and understanding the circumstances that I'm going through. I think that was a large challenge for me, my 2L year of knowing that this pandemic has had a large impact on me, that I'm not going to be as productive as I was my first year of law school, but I can still get things done. And I just need to figure out what is going to work for me in my current state. And so now that I'm going into my 3L year, where most likely will be in person, I'll be back in Jersey too. I've been in a different area this entire time. So I'm hoping to be able to recenter myself, refocus myself, and just remember my why of why I'm in law school, why I chose to come here so I can advocate for the people when I get done. And so for just generally, I would tell students who are entering their 2L year, their 3L year, remember your why and be kind to yourself.
Thank you, Jalen, and good luck on your 3L. And I'm sure you'll enjoy the Jersey pizza too. And now I'd love to turn to Nina, who will be practicing clerking in Mercer County. So Nina, questions for you.
So I think just as someone that's going to be entering the legal profession soon, I think my biggest thing that I want to focus on is not being afraid to speak up, not being afraid to speak out when I see things. You know, I'm not going to let a complicit culture just completely consume wherever firm or wherever I'm working. That's not going to be it. And I'm going to be confident in speaking up because I'm not only paving the way for myself, but for others that come behind me. Whether it's, you know, addressing me as a female appropriately, or addressing other things, addressing race, or, you know, whatever it may be. Not sitting back, not just letting it slide by, and making sure that I set an example for those that come behind me.
Thank you, Nina. And finally, and good luck clerking. And then finally, Tway, entering your 3L year. What are some of your ideas?
Basically, everything that everyone already said. I love how Jalen brought in self-care. And I think self-care can be done also through like relationships with others, but just mostly with like, and again, in terms of like organizing, so important. But like self-care in the sense that like realizing that like experiencing joy can be like an act of resistance, and it is an act of resistance, right? Because everything is made to make you feel isolated, and consciously choosing joy is what we need to do. So that's first and foremost. And then second, I would say, in my future in law careers, I really want to shift from like public interest, traditional public interest mindsets to movement lawyering mindsets. Right, to working actively with the community, to building relationships with community, putting their needs and ideas first, and being a tool for their movements and their ideas rather than imparting my ideas on them. That's too white savior. We're not about that anymore, right? So let's move to that movement learning stuff. Yeah, and I hope to practice some of those organizing skills while at law school, and then afterwards apply it in my communities.
Thank you, Tway. Joy is an act of resistance. That's very profound. So that is all the time we have. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate you being here. I'm going to throw it to Monica just to sign us off.
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and over the course of the 3 days, and our panelists today for being such strong voices in the Rutgers community, and for being guiding posts for students. We thank you so much. And the recordings will be posted on the Rutgers Race and Law Review website, so please check them out, and feel free to contact us at our email. And also our Symposium edition will be coming out throughout the course of the summer and the fall if you want to read some of the remarks from our speakers over the last few days. So thank you again for joining us. We hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.